This UCF bunch must be here to stay. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking the black and gold with Jeff Sharon from the Black and Gold Banneret, the SB Nation site for UCF football. So there's a date with the LSU Tigers on New Year's Day for the Fiesta Bowl. So UCF, for his second consecutive year, Jeff, snubbed by the College Football Playoff Committee. So you more so than I do, because you're feeling it right here, but me logically has an issue with the team winning game after game after game for two consecutive seasons, not getting the opportunity to prove it at the very highest level, but another marquee matchup against the SEC coming up.
Yeah, and part of the problem that came out of the game last year against Auburn in the Peach Bowl, when UCF beat the Tigers to finish off last year's undefeated season, was there was a lot of talk about how afterwards, well, Auburn wasn't motivated because they lost in the SEC championship game to Auburn, and that blew their chance at the playoff and all that. And so now UCF fans are kind of girding themselves, at least at this point, to say, oh, well, is LSU going to say the same thing? We think not. So I think everyone's kind of been paying very close attention to what's been coming out of Baton Rouge. But, the Knights are ready for this. I think that Josh Heupel, the head coach, has played this brilliantly this year. His entire mantra, we in the media around UCF have kind of scoffed at it a little bit, but I think it's brilliant. He said, our mantra is go 1-0 each week. Go 1-0. Go 1-0. Don't need to worry about a single thing, outside of this. Just focus on this one game at hand. And given the fact that on the outside, I think UCF's players still feel, for lack of a better term, disrespected by not just the College Football Playoff Committee, like you said, Mark, but the annals of elite college football itself. They want nothing more than to say, okay, you thought last year was a one-off thing. You thought beating Auburn last year was a one-off thing. Let's go ahead and take on another SEC opponent in a bowl game, and we'll show you exactly how much of a one-off thing it is. So this team remains solidly focused. I in the 18 years I've been around UCF, I don't think I've ever seen a team as a group as single-mindedly focused as this group has. And obviously, part of that has to do with the kids themselves, and, well, a huge part of it, obviously. But I think the coaching staff deserves a lot of credit for channeling that and continuing this incredible run of 25 consecutive wins.
Jeff, it is impossible for me to express how incredibly much I despise the excuse of motivation in bowl games.
I know.
I'm not saying
Tell me about it.
It does exist. There's no question. It exists, but for us to, number one, conjecture on how much it exists for one particular team and not another team, and try to measure it and think that we know, and going into the hearts and minds of 18 to 22-year-old athletes, number one, is ridiculous. We can conjecture. I don't have an issue with, I'm open for the discussion that we can conjecture that, oh, well, this team had high expectations. Take your pick. Ohio State, always guns for the playoff. They should be in the playoff. They think they should be in the playoff. Therefore, the Rose Bowl's a consolation. They won't be motivated. I understand that might be the case, but that should not be an excuse for them, nor should we assume that, even though we have reasons to believe that that's the case, that it is the case. LSU was not expected to be a factor at all this season. Most people had them pegged for 6 or 7 wins. They won 9 of 12 games. They put themselves in a position that most people did not believe that they would be in, and that's a New Year's Six bowl. If anything, Central Florida was more of a wild card. Either the thought was that they would continue with much of the same core of players and the culture that had been built under Scott Frost, or some people thought, well, they'd lost some NFL talent. Scott Frost and his staff was off to Nebraska. Therefore, they probably would drop off. Well, they did not. They continued. So I don't want to hear any excuses out of LSU if they lose this game, or their fan base. You show up and you play the games. If anything, I hate to hear that the bowl games are exhibitions as well, because if there's any one game this year in which all of College Football Nation is going to be watching LSU and Central Florida, it's this game. These games are, and this is a bad example because you're going up directly against another bowl game, but typically the bowl games are exclusive TV slotted for just that one event. Yeah, I don't want to hear that in regards to motivation. That just drives me nuts. It's an excuse for losing.
It drives us crazy too. It drives us crazy too, because my thought on it is like, if the problem coming out of that is, well, we weren't motivated, then you need to fire your coach. That's the coach's job, to get your team ready to play whichever game you're playing, whatever may be at stake. And so if Auburn, this is going to sound unbelievable, but if Auburn wasn't motivated last year to play UCF, Gus Malzahn should have been fired. And if LSU is not motivated to play UCF this year in the Fiesta Bowl, they should fire Ed Orgeron. That's their job. So I, like you, Mark, none of us want to hear it from any team that may come across, that may, trundle under UCF's path, that they weren't motivated to play the game. The secret's out. They've won 25 in a row.
I understand your sentiment. I don't completely agree with firing a coach based on the result of one particular game, but I completely understand your sentiment. What I think they should do is, I think anybody who's participated in athletics at any level has been in a situation in which they felt as though the opponent was not as good, and for whatever reason, they just didn't feel good that day, or the chemistry with the rest of the units on the team, they didn't play their best for whatever reason. But as a result, they lost that game. The competition on the field and the result is all that matters. We don't want to hear excuses. Internalize that. You can talk about it in the clubhouse or the locker room, but what you need to tell all of us is, we got beat by a better team today. Yeah. Don't give us excuses that you weren't motivated.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Otherwise, just don't show up.
Right. Why are you there?
Show up and forfeit the game, because it's an athletic competition. And that obviously, that, if anything, speaks. I would rather have Auburn come out and say, we gave 100% effort and they beat us fair and square. I would respect that more than them saying, we weren't motivated, that's how we lost. You know what? You're supposed to be an athlete, a competitor, and you didn't compete. I have less respect for you saying you're more talented, but you lost because you weren't motivated, than saying, you know what? We gave it our best and they still beat us, but we at least laid it on the line.
I think, and the players last year said, to a man, they were like, motivation was not a factor. We were ready to play. It mostly comes out of the fan bases. And the fan bases don't want to admit that they got beat by UCF, and the ones that don't want to admit that they got beat head to head are the ones probably that don't know that much about UCF to begin with. Well, what a difference a year makes, at least at this point, with UCF having this long winning streak, winning the conference again. And winning the conference, by the way, with a backup quarterback, a redshirt freshman backup quarterback too, in Daryl Mack. So there's a lot going into this game. I think that it's just a much different feel for UCF heading into this bowl game than it was last year. I think it's always hard to stay at that top level. The coaches and players all the time talk about getting to the top. The climb is one thing, staying at the top is another. So I think we're in for a very good game in Phoenix, or Glendale rather, on New Year's Day. It's kind of a bummer that the time slot is so early, 11 a.m. local kick in Arizona, 1 p.m. Eastern time. But I'm pretty sure UCF's in a position where they're like, tell us where and when. We're ready to go to play an SEC team.
So, Jeff, I'd like to have you take off on Mac, but I want to close off one point that you made that I think is very important. And I'm glad you made the distinction between the Auburn players and the fan base, because I heard nothing else out of the Auburn team. But yeah, we should have won this game. We didn't, meaning we should have won this game, meaning don't blame anything else, but we did not perform today. And they took accountability for it from what I heard. And it was the fan base that made the excuses.
Right.